Okay, so this is chapter 9, gender, and part 1 of the PowerPoints. So we're going to start with slide 2, because I numbered them starting with the title page, and talk about the difference between sex and gender. Now, I think I told you guys that towards the last half of the class, then I actually kind of review what the mainstream thinks of something versus the sociological understanding. So mainstream then, once again, the bulk of a society, kind of the large part of a society believes, and it's changing with sex and gender, thankfully. But what you find is that the mainstream actually believes that biological sex and gender are the same concept, right? That I had a student who took my Soc 206 class, Sociology of Gender and Sexuality, and during the intros, when we asked, well, why did you take this course? The first thing he said was, well, I thought this course would be easy because it sounded like a joke. And the second was, what am I supposed to learn here? There are boys and there are girls. What else are we supposed to learn? Well, it is this understanding, and I think most of the mainstream believes this, which is that your gender then is actually tied to your biological sex, and it is an absolute kind of no overlap kind of thing. In sociology, what we maintain is that biological sex and gender are distinct and separate concepts, right? They're strongly correlated, but they are not the same thing. So I'm actually going to start out with biological sex, right? And throughout this class, I've used the word sex in multiple ways, but in this case, then we are talking about biological sex in terms of physiology. And usually I will use the distinction before I start lecturing when I'm talking about sex, distinguishing between biological sex and sexual acts. Okay. But your biological sex is very simple. You've kind of already know this one. It is an individual's membership in one of two categories, female or male, based on biological factors. That when it comes to biological sex, we tend to think of it as discrete, right, as mutually exclusive, and as dichotomous because there is female and male. Now, with biological sex, we make a distinction between primary sex characteristics, which are the ones that are present at birth. That when we think of it, most people just think of genitalia only, but you're looking at this idea of your chromosomal patterns, which you can't really see because they're expressed by genitalia. However, the chromosomes actually matter. The hormone concentration that you have in your body matters. And then also your sex organs and genitalia. Okay, so primary sex characteristics, secondary sex characteristics are the ones that develop with puberty. All of you have taken health. I don't have to explain to you what happens at puberty. And the traditional mainstream assumption is that biological sex is binary. There's only those two categories, and they're always self-contained. You are either male or female. That in slide 4, though, what I maintain is that when you look at this idea of biology, sex is not binary and discrete. Okay, because what we have are intersex individuals, and I give you some example of them just so that you can kind of know what I am talking about. So I'm not going to test you on these different forms of intersex, but just telling you so that you know that they are there. So the first one is Turner syndrome, and this one then applies to baby girls, women. And in that one, you are looking at a chromosomal pattern of 45XO. That in this case, then, women with Turner syndrome tend to be much shorter than usual. The neck tends to be a bit thicker. And then in secondary, sex characteristics don't start developing because there is the need of hormonal supplements in order to kind of develop into secondary, into puberty. AIS, or androgen insensitivity syndrome, you are actually looking at 46XY chromosomal pattern. So chromosomally male. However, because they can't actually process the androgen that washes over the body, and this is what I tell people. I'm not a biology professor, obviously, and my biology colleagues are probably cringing at my explanations. But when you are in utero, the baby then, basically the same cells create both forms of sexual organs. That is, female genitalia and male genitalia come from the same types of cells. And what develops into the clitoris and vulva for a baby girl actually develops into a penis and scrotum for a baby boy. For boys, it's androgen that causes and triggers this development. However, with people with androgen insensitivity syndrome, they actually don't register the androgen. So what happens is, even though it is a 46XY chromosomal pattern, there is basically no female sexual organs. Okay, so you do have female genitalia because you are looking at this idea that the outside did not develop into a penis and scrotum, but also then not the internal sexual organs. So 5-alpha reductase deficiency is actually one of the more fascinating forms of intersex. Okay, and with this, there is female presentation at birth. That is, when these kids are born, everyone thinks that they're baby girls. They are then raised as baby girls. They are treated like baby girls. However, at puberty then, the clitoris actually enlarges to a penis and then testicles descend. So after the age of 12 then, generally these girls who have 5-alpha reductase deficiency actually develop into boys. There is a special phenomenon. It is a small village in the Dominican Republic, and these kids are called hueroses. So I wrote down the word on PowerPoint. You may want to do a quick Google because it is a very interesting phenomenon. There's some interviews up that you can actually reference when you are learning about this. Okay, so even in biology, gender is not binary and discrete. I mean, sex is not binary and discrete. What happens is that intersex is fairly common, that the estimates are that it is about 2 cases in every 100 live births. Why don't you ever hear about it? Because generally parents feel very stigmatized by it. That is, they don't want to say, well, is it a boy or a girl? Well, I'm not exactly sure. So what has happened in the past, and so before modern era, when you actually keep your baby with you the entire time when you're a mom, they used to actually whisk away the baby as soon as it was born to kind of take care of it, kept the baby in a nursery and just brought it to the mom to feed, etc. What they found was that a lot of doctors were actually correcting these babies without the consent of the parents. What happens when you correct an intersex baby? Well, it's always easier to subtract than add. And so most of these babies then were turned into baby girls by default. And some of you guys are already thinking, well, that doesn't sound right. It wasn't right, because pretty much the doctors made a convenient guess based on the physiology that was there and said, well, it's easier to just make this baby into a girl baby. What happened then is that intersex individuals ended up suing doctors for making this decision for them. Even more interesting, you have intersex people who actually sued their parents for making that decision for them also. Okay, so that covers biological sex. The topic that we're going to be concerned about in sociology, Intro to Soc, is gender. Okay. So gender is the physical, behavioral, and personality traits that a group considers to be normal, and I always put the air quotes, right? Normal, natural, appropriate, and right for its male and female members. Now, what I argue with this one is you're not necessarily looking at physiology when it says physical. What do they mean by physical? Well, if you look at me right now, I am actually wearing makeup, right? So it is physical that I'm actually manipulating how I look, that my hair is actually long. And what we've talked about before is even though there are women with very, very short hair and quite a few who are shaving your heads during this whole pandemic, and there are a lot of men with long hair, that generally we still attribute longer hair to women and shorter hair to men. Okay. So once again, we go back to the concept that we learned in Deviance, and that is the idea of essentialist versus constructionist. And as you may guess, essentialists actually see gender as immutable, not changeable, and biological. That is, it is directly tied to physiology. The argument that, well, depending on what genitalia you have, then you are a certain gender. Essentialists then believe in what we call a gender binary. Gender binary system that classifies gender into two distinct, opposite, and separate categories. That what I argue with this one is that we generally tend, as mainstream society, to kind of frame male and female as oppositional, even though in a lot of cases, most of it is overlap. Okay. So those are the essentialists, which you guys know is more of a mainstream attitude and understanding. Constructionists actually see gender as a fluid social construction. So this is a sociological understanding of it. And what we maintain is there are genders outside the binary. It's not just masculine and feminine, male or female, and that our definitions of what is masculine and what is feminine actually vary by culture, right? They change throughout time, they change throughout history, and they also change within the situation.